Welcome to today's discussion, where together we will look at one of those truly big questions.
Good day.
We have interesting materials available here. It's a presentation by a biology student, Taylor, who focused on the origin of life, specifically on its enormous complexity and problems with the theory of abiogenesis.
Yes, abiogenesis, meaning the idea that life arose on its own from non-living matter. These materials look at what today's biology tells us about the cell.
And what questions does it raise regarding, let's say, the random origin of DNA and life?
Exactly. What paradoxes arise there? We will go through the arguments that Taylor presents.
All right, let's get to it. What do those materials say about the complexity of the cell? Try to explain it for those of us who aren't exactly biologists.
Sure. Well, the presentation emphasizes that even the simplest cells we know are, well, just incredibly complex.
Like really complicated.
Extremely. Take, for example, the smallest known bacterium, Mycoplasma genitalium. Just its DNA, that genetic code, contains over 34 million atoms.
34 million in one bacterium?
Yes, and an ordinary yeast cell contains about 42 million protein molecules. Those are the workers of the cell.
That's wow.
And now imagine that in the 19th century, when abiogenesis was first discussed, they imagined the cell as, well, just a simple drop of some jelly. Today we know it's more like a miniature, expertly managed city.
42 million proteins. It's really hard to imagine in something so microscopic, and you say that all of it is necessary, that it's not useless.
Exactly. According to those materials, it is not any luxury. It is the absolute minimum for life to function. Even when scientists created an artificial minimal cell in the laboratory that is completely stripped down, it still needed over 400 genes. Genes that encode vital proteins.
So it simply can't go below this limit?
It seems so. These proteins function like components in incredibly complex machines and production lines inside the cell. Incredible coordination.
All right. So the cell is super complex. And how does that relate to abiogenesis? I assume that it's precisely this complexity that is the problem, right?
Exactly. How could something like that come about? Well, by itself, by chance. The famous Miller-Urey experiment from the 1950s is often mentioned.
Yeah, I heard about that. They tried to simulate conditions on early Earth, right?
Yes, water, an atmosphere without oxygen, electrical discharges like lightning. They wanted to find out if the basic building blocks of life could have arisen like that.
And did it succeed? Did life arise in a test tube?
No, not at all. According to the data, only a few basic amino acids were formed. Those are the building blocks of proteins.
At least something.
And right-handed. And life uses exclusively those that are left-handed. It's like with gloves. You can't put a left glove on a right hand.
So the mixture was actually useless.
From the perspective of the origin of life as we know it, yes. And Taylor in that presentation points to another. Problems. Those conditions in the experiment probably didn't reflect the reality of early Earth at all. Lightning would likely destroy the forming molecules, and even if the right amino acids formed, it's still just a tiny step. To have life, you need functional proteins, DNA, membranes, everything at once and functional.
I understand. So that famous experiment didn't really show much according to those materials. And what about the paradoxes? They say that's where it gets even more interesting.
Yes, that's the, well, fascinating part. The materials describe several chicken or egg situations. For example, the information paradox.
Go on.
DNA carries information, instructions for building proteins. But to read those instructions and produce proteins, you need complex molecular machines, like ribosomes. However, these ribosomes are themselves largely made up of proteins. So you need proteins to be able to produce proteins according to the instructions in DNA. What came first?
That's really confusing. It's like I need an instruction manual to assemble a washing machine, but the manual is written in a language that only the assembled washing machine can read.
Exactly that type of problem. And another one is the time paradox. The emergence of something so complex by chance would probably need an awful lot of time, right? Millions, billions of years.
Logically.
But time is also the enemy. Complex organic molecules are not very stable. They tend to break down. The more time you give them, the more likely they are to decompose rather than randomly form into something functional.
So time is against it.
Actually, yes. And there are other paradoxes too. with the concentration of substances like phosphate, with ultraviolet radiation, with the need for DNA repair mechanisms, which themselves need functional DNA. It all points to the fact that a lot of things had to emerge and work simultaneously. It is extremely interconnected.
When I listen to it like this, it seems that according to the presentation, the random emergence of life is really, well, very improbable. It uses some strong expressions for it. You mentioned that dramatic aspect.
Yes, the presentation depicts it as astronomically improbable, like something that simply could not have happened by chance. It argues that the more we know about the cell, the more obstacles we see for the theory of abiogenesis. That it is not an argument from what we don't know, but precisely from what we know about that incredible complexity. The probability is described there as practically zero.
So if not by chance, then what? What explanation do the materials suggest?
The perspective that Taylor presents is that the enormous, specifically arranged complexity and the informational code in DNA strongly resemble intelligent design.
Like in a machine or program?
Exactly. When we see a complex machine or software, we automatically think it must have been created by someone intelligent. And those materials say that biological systems are even more sophisticated. So why shouldn't that logic apply here as well?
Alright, let's sum it up then. What should we take away from this perspective on the Taylor materials?
The main idea is that the cell is incredibly complex and its random formation, according to these materials, encounters fundamental chemical, informational, probabilistic, and logical paradox problems. So the theory of abiogenesis, although popular, from this perspective, actually does not have much solid evidence.
And instead, there's an interpretation that the amazing complexity and information in living systems might point to, well, an intelligent origin?
Yes, that it could be a strong indicator. It is, of course, a perspective that sparks discussions.
Certainly fascinating, although perhaps a controversial view for some. Our today's insight into sources about the origin of life was indeed thought-provoking. We hope it also sparked curiosity in you.
There is definitely something to think about.
What if that incredibly complex code of life isn't just a game of chance, but carries, let's say, the signature of its creator?
Thank you for being with us today. If you enjoyed our discussion and are interested in similar topics in depth, we would really appreciate your like or subscription.
We look forward to next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.